Our film begins with Natascha Kampusch, who is at a bar with her father. At the time, Natascha was still a little girl, around 10 years old. Her father gets drunk and forgets to take her home on time so she can sleep early for school. Natascha ends up getting home late and sleeps only a few short hours before her mother wakes her up and tells her to put on her dress to go to school. Natascha has breakfast with her mother in the kitchen. Her mother tells her that a bar is no place for children, and if her father brings her home late again, it will be the last time she is allowed to go out with him. Natascha tries to respond, but her mother slaps her across the face. She then apologizes for what she did, but Natascha is upset and leaves the house without eating breakfast, heading to school in tears because of what happened. Suddenly, a man named Wolfgang appears, stepping out of his truck. He kidnaps Natascha and takes her to his house. There, he brings her into an underground room, the entrance of which is hidden behind a safe and covered with wooden flooring. When Natascha wakes up, she finds herself in a narrow room with no windows and no sunlight. The only features in the room are a ventilation fan on the wall, a sink, and a toilet. Wolfgang then enters the room, carrying a small mattress for Natascha to sleep on. He brings her food and water, then leaves without saying a word, locking the door behind him. At that moment, Natascha tries to open the door, but it's tightly locked. She screams, hoping someone might hear her, but that's impossible because the room is underground. On the third day, Wolfgang brings storybooks and starts reading them to Natascha. He also brings her the kind of biscuits she likes. As he prepares to leave the room so she can sleep, Natascha asks him for a bedtime gesture. Just a caring look, like her mother used to give her before sleep. Wolfgang is moved, kisses her on the forehead, and leaves the room. Outside, the news of Natascha's kidnapping spreads across all channels, and people are talking about it everywhere. Wolfgang is at home when his mother comes to visit. She usually drops by every few days to clean the house and cook for him. She watches the news with her son, and when Natascha's case comes on, she asks, "Who would kidnap and assault a little girl?" Wolfgang pretends not to know, and replies that the kidnapper might just be insane. One day, Wolfgang takes Natascha to the bathroom to wash her hair. There, she gives him a letter and asks him to send it to her family so they won't worry about her. While he washes her hair, she tells him she wants to go back home. He gets angry and tells her that he had already informed her family that he was holding her for ransom, and if they really cared about her, they would have paid to get her back. He also tells her that they don't care about her and that her presence doesn't matter to them. She responds by calling him a liar. This makes him furious, especially when he hears her crying. He starts choking her and forces her head under the water in the sink, telling her to stop crying. Then he orders her to clean the water off the floor and leaves the room, locking the door behind him. One day, Wolfgang is sitting in his garden with his mother when the police arrive. They open his car and start asking questions as part of the investigation into Natascha's kidnapping. But they don't find anything suspicious, especially after seeing Wolfgang's family at the house. The next day, Natascha is asleep, dreaming of her family and how much she misses them. She feels like she'll never see them again. Wolfgang enters the room and wakes her up to eat. Natascha asks him for a watch so she can count the hours and days she's been held captive. Wolfgang tells her he'll agree if she behaves well in the coming days. Later, he installs a telephone device in her room to communicate with her directly. Natascha asks him, "Do you feel lonely, even though you're free, like I do while being held captive?" Wolfgang doesn't know how to answer. He leaves the room, thinking about her question, and eventually tears up her letter. The days passed, and on day 183, Natascha was playing alone in the room. She bumped into things and pretended she was at school, playing the role of a teacher with imaginary students. She drew a doorknob on the door and even sketched a room on the wall, since she had no contact with anyone except Wolfgang. While she was playing, Wolfgang called out to her, asking if she had brushed her teeth and cleaned the dishes she used. He kept repeating his instructions and demanded that she obey him, revealing just how mentally disturbed and insecure he was. The next day, Natascha smeared leftover food on her arm and pretended to have a skin disease. When Wolfgang entered the room with food, she showed him her arm and asked him to take her to a doctor. But he realized it was all an act, so he punished her by locking her up for a long time. He started treating her violently. He carried her while she screamed and told her, "Scream all you want, no one will hear you." He even took her to the exit door to show it to her, as a form of psychological torment, then threw her back into the room and left. 4 days passed, and Natascha hadn't eaten anything. She spoke to Wolfgang through their private phone and begged him to bring her food, but he didn't respond. She broke down crying, saying she just wanted to go home. Wolfgang finally replied, but all he said was the same as always: "Obey me and do as I say." 4 years passed since Natascha's kidnapping, and the situation remained unchanged. Wolfgang continued to deprive her of food for 3 or even 4 days in a row. Natascha kept pleading with him daily for something to eat, but he just repeated his usual command. Her body had become extremely thin, with bones clearly showing through her skin due to the lack of nutrition and the constant psychological stress she was living under. She had been there for 4 years, missing the sunlight. She didn't even understand doors and windows because Wolfgang had convinced her they were rigged with bombs and that if she tried to escape, she would die in an explosion. One time, he allowed her to accompany him to the bathroom, and there she saw sunlight for the first time in 4 years. One day, Wolfgang's mother came to visit him at his house. She noticed a single blonde hair on his clothes and happily assumed that her son had a girlfriend for the first time. After she left, Wolfgang brought out a hair clipper and shaved off all of Natascha's hair. 5 years after Natascha was kidnapped, Christmas came. She celebrated it alone, like every year. She decorated her room and set up a small Christmas tree to bring a little joy to herself, something she rarely felt. Wolfgang entered, dressed in an elegant suit, carrying food and a video camera to record Natascha opening the gifts he had brought her. The gifts included a music player and 3 popular novels. Natascha asked him if she could call her family, but he got angry and told her to consider her family dead. Months later, Wolfgang decided to make Natascha sleep with him in the same room on the same bed. He would hold her hand with his while they slept so she wouldn't escape. Later, Wolfgang went on a skiing trip and left Natascha alone in the room. She asked him once if she could go with him, promising to behave well, but he ignored her request, took her to her room, and locked the door. When he returned from the trip, he went to a party and tried to socialize with people. However, due to his mental illness and inability to interact normally, he quickly left and returned home. That night, he assaulted Natascha in his bed. She was passive and resigned, knowing she couldn't do anything to stop him. After that, Natascha asked Wolfgang to take her to his garden at night. He agreed and took her outside, but he became anxious that someone might see her, so he decided to take her back to her room. Natascha resisted him, so he pulled her violently, cut the rope he had tied her with, and threw her back into the room. After 5.5 years of captivity, Wolfgang began to enslave Natascha, forcing her to do all the housework. He would constantly beat her and call her a stupid dog. He would cook food, leave her starving for days, and then eat in front of her deliberately. One time, Natascha tried to eat some of his food. He caught her, hit her, forced the food out of her mouth before she could swallow it, and then locked her in the room without any food. Months later, Wolfgang decided to take Natascha out and bought her new clothes. He warned her that if she tried to escape, he would kill her with the gun he had. They went to a construction supply store to choose paint for Wolfgang's room. He left Natascha alone there, but she couldn't escape. She just kept hearing his voice in her head, ordering her around. When Wolfgang returned, they both left and went back home. Months later, Wolfgang showed Natascha his renovated room. In reality, it was Natascha who had done all the renovation work herself under his command. A few days later, Natascha heard the news on the radio. The announcer said that they believed she might be dead. Natascha felt deeply depressed while sitting in her room, but Wolfgang wouldn't leave her alone. She asked him why he had chosen her specifically to kidnap. Wolfgang explained why he had abducted her in the first place, saying that he saw her smile when she was a little girl in a shop, eating a biscuit. From that moment, he began digging and building her underground room for 8 continuous months. One day, Natascha decided to end her life. She could no longer bear the miserable existence she was living with her rapist, Wolfgang. She brought some tissues, set them on fire inside the room, and tried to die from the smoke. But her survival instinct overcame her. She put out the fire and extinguished the burning tissues, even though the room was filled with smoke. Wolfgang discovered her suicide attempt and beat her severely. He kept terrifying her, and she had no way to defend herself. Natascha began counting the number of blows he dealt her and wrote them down on tissues. Months later, Wolfgang took Natascha with him on a skiing trip to snowy hills. However, Natascha's body was so weak that she could barely move, and she wasn't able to stand or ski. She kept falling immediately. She told Wolfgang she needed to go to the bathroom. He assured her that no one was inside so that she wouldn't try to talk to anyone, but he didn't check for himself and allowed her to go in. While in the bathroom, Natascha heard another girl next to her. She rushed out and said, "I'm Natascha Kampusch, the girl who was kidnapped 8 years ago. Please help me." But the girl in the bathroom spoke Russian and didn't understand what Natascha was saying. As soon as Natascha came out of the bathroom, Wolfgang saw her, took her, and they left together. While they were in the car, he asked her what she had said to the girl in the bathroom. She told him she hadn't said anything, but he got furious and slapped her hard across the face. Then he continued beating her all over her body while shouting at her not to lie to him. Natascha went back to her room and wrote down the number of hits she had received that day. She placed the tissue she had written on into a large box filled with hundreds of tissues, each one holding a memory of 8 years of beatings. On her 18th birthday, Wolfgang celebrated with her. He gave her a dress and forced her to dance with him, even though her body had become too weak to move or stand properly. The next day, Wolfgang decided to sell his car because he needed money. He forced Natascha to clean it inside and out, and even made her wear the birthday dress while doing it, ruining it completely. While Wolfgang went to take a phone call in a distant spot with signal coverage, Natascha noticed that the garden gate was open. She was afraid to escape, but she had reached her limit and no longer cared what might happen. So she finally walked through the gate and ran away quickly and fearfully. She reached a stranger's house and told the woman that she had been kidnapped. The police arrived shortly after, and she told them she was Natascha Kampusch, the girl who had been abducted 8 years ago, and that she had finally managed to escape. The police called Natascha's mother and told her they had found her daughter. When Wolfgang learned that Natascha had escaped, he wrote a note saying that she had run away, then took his own life. At last, Natascha was reunited with her family after 3,096 days of separation. If you finish this summary, don't forget to like and subscribe to encourage us to keep going.